Hey guys, it's Nikki here to bring you more videos on my new chaotic, when I feel like it, low stress schedule. I will likely be putting out the footage for my quarterly vlog soon, but today we're here to talk about my read of the month for March, which was The Devil in the Dark Water by Stuart Turton. I read The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle during like peak COVID lockdown in my province, and I really enjoyed it. And so when I heard he was coming out with a new book, I immediately wanted to pick it up. Due to some motivation issues, I probably only read the first 30 pages physically, and then I listened to the complete rest of the book as an audiobook at work. That's just how it's been working for me lately. And the audiobook was very well done. I went in basically knowing what's on the back of the book. There's a murder on the high seas. They're shipping out to go back home where the main character's friend is to stand trial. And shit starts going down on the boat. And people think that it is of supernatural origin. And that's all I knew going in. And I think that was like a pretty good bare bones summary to know going in. And that's what the story was. It does kind of turn your normal kind of detective duo on the head though, because you follow kind of two main characters, Errant and Sarah. Errant is like the Watson to his friends' Holmes. His friend is accused of a crime and is being sent back to, I was going to say Dutchland. That is not what I wanted. Is being sent back to the Netherlands to stand trial and likely face execution. And during this trip, like I said, things start going sideways, starting right on the docks as they're boarding the boat. And so Errant is kind of charged by his friend to look into the matter and see what's going on. And he ends up doing this with the help of Sarah, who is the wife of the Governor General of the kind of city-state that they just left. They are on a boat that's owned by the Dutch East Indies, and so there's a lot of trade. The people on the ship, some are really reliable and some aren't, and it just makes a really good isolated setting. And I think that really contributed a lot to the tone. But in terms of story, that's kind of the plot, and I'll just talk briefly about kind of story progression here. Largely, I found this really, really engaging. I found it really hard to put down. Honestly, I probably could have made myself read this physically, but I've just been having a really hard time focusing on a physical book. And I was engaged the entire way through with the audiobook, so I really don't feel like my experience suffered. The one thing I like about mysteries is they answer, one or two questions, and then a new one comes up because there's just that little loose end that doesn't really make sense. And I think that was really well done here. That sense of intrigue and mystery just was woven really, really well throughout the narrative. There was enough obstacles to keep it interesting. And until you kind of reach the end twist, none of it felt particularly overly convoluted or unbelievable. And this is where I'm going to give you a mild spoiler warning. Jump ahead probably a minute or so to avoid this. I'll pick the book back up when it's time. And that is the ending. I wasn't a huge fan, and a lot of that had to do just with the fact that it was overly convoluted and didn't feel particularly believable, which is really unfortunate. But it didn't feel like it finished as strong as, say, I felt the ending to The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle was. It was still, I think, reasonably satisfying. It was just a lot less believable because there really wasn't that supernatural or science fiction twist to kind of explain everything away. It just, these two people were just really smart, and that's how they pulled the wool over everyone's eyes. And so now, with that kind of story progression and plot summary out of the way, I'm going to talk briefly about the characters. I've already mentioned two, and they are two of my favorite, and that is Arendt and Sarah. They made really, really good protagonists, and they complemented each other really well. They were both smart and engaging and just super, super easy to follow. It was so enjoyable. Even the side characters and the characters that eventually become villains were really interesting. That's something that I think Stuart Turton does really well, is write a variety of interesting and incredibly believable characters. Like, none of these characters were infallible. Even the ones that were kind of told that you were told they were infallible weren't as infallible as you thought. And and part of the reason this story progressed so well and flowed so nicely is because of how well the characters were written. And I really can't emphasize that enough here. Stuart Turton just did a brilliant job with them. You have a couple others like Krisha, who is Sarah's friend and Sarah's husband's mistress, and just the relationship that the mistress had with Sarah's husband and that Krisha had with Sarah was just really interesting, and it was just a really complex and fun relationship to follow. And then the relationship that develops with Sarah and Arendt as they progress through solving this mystery, the relationship between Arendt and his friend Sammy, who is like the Sherlock of their duo, the relationship with Arendt and the ship captain. Like, it was just very, very, very well done. And I it's honestly one of the biggest strengths of the book. So now I'm just going to give you a couple quick positives and negatives on top of what I've already said to kind of give you an idea of whether or not this book is for you. My first one is it really is a well-done whodunit mystery. I don't typically love books like this, like that are that thriller, or that are like mystery thriller whodunit, because sometimes they can feel very predictable. And here I was proven wrong. While some things were very predictable, the fact that the character work was so strong just made this an unreal, in a good way, experience. And I felt like the whodunit aspect was done really well because of how well done the characters were. The second positive I'm going to give you here is the pacing. As I mentioned with the story progression, like it flowed really well between the characters and the atmosphere and the tone and the setting. And what that really did for us was allow for very, very good pacing. You never dwelt on anything too long. It slowed down and sped up as necessary, but it wasn't overly plotting. Until you get to the end, it wasn't rushed. Like, you really got to sit with the important elements of the story as long as you needed, and they would circle back, but in a way that wasn't too repetitive, I found. And just because of that, the pacing was just brilliant and really helped keep me engaged and really helped keep the story interesting. And now, unfortunately, I'm going to talk about some negatives. And the big negative for me, which I've kind of already touched on, was the ending. And it's not to say it wasn't necessarily satisfying, because in its own way it was. It just wasn't the ending that I was expecting based on how well done and surprising the ending of The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle was. Like I said, I'm still not completely unsatisfied with it. It just wasn't... It definitely took away from my overall enjoyment of the book because of how it played out. And my second negative is there's a few things in the book that aren't like perfectly historically accurate in the grand scheme of things. It's a very nitpicky thing. There's nothing wrong with what goes on, and if you suspend your disbelief for certain things, it will be fine. But there are just a few small things where I was like, I don't think this actually could have been done in this time period. I don't think that, very, very small, very, very nitpicky things that I think largely people aren't going to notice. So unless you get hung up on little details like that, like I sometimes do, it's probably not going to be an issue for you. And that is the bulk of my review here. So I'm going to do just a real quick wrap up. I'm giving this book a 4 out of 5. It would have been a 5 out of 5 had the ending gone a little bit more my way in terms of my enjoyment. But like I said, this was really strong character work. It was a really well done kind of whodunit mystery thriller. It was isolated. The tone was beautiful. The pacing and progression were amazing. There's just a few small things like the ending, which arguably may not be that small, and just a few little nitpicky details that really pulled me out of it. But largely, it was good. So I'm going to leave you here and jump into some book club questions really quick. Here's the really spoilery part of my video. If I've moved in frame, that's because I got up, grabbed my notebook, and sat back down. And this is just the 6 kind of like book club like questions that I do every monthly video, or for every monthly review. And the first one is, what is your initial reaction? I was super intrigued because you get a good idea of the situation in terms of Aaron and Sammy's relationship, and that something has gone terribly wrong that is leading them to leave in disgrace when they are usually very well renowned. And so I was intrigued right off the get-go. What is my favorite chapter or scene? There are far too many to pick from, to be honest. But a lot of the sleuthing scenes with Aaron and Sarah were really, really entertaining and intriguing for me, just because of how they approached the situation and how they kind of complemented each other so well in terms of their sleuthing and personalities. 3, how did the characters change throughout the story? Sarah, everybody changed a little bit just because of all of the drama and tension and like fear of being on the high seas and things that were going wrong in the story. So like as the mystery is coming to a close, like Aaron's opinion of Sammy was changing, Sarah's opinion of Krisha was changing, their opinion of each other was changing, and just the situation and Sarah's husband, all of these situations were changing. And it was just everybody changed just little bits, but like it felt really natural based on the progression of the story. 4, how did you like the ending? I didn't love the ending. It was largely satisfactory, but it wasn't quite of the same caliber that the ending to The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle was for me. 5, would you read another book by this author? Yes. I still would want to read a few more books by Stuart Turton before he becomes an auto-buy author, but this and the first book I read by him are definitely some of my most enjoyable reads of the years I picked them up. And what other book does this remind you of? It doesn't really remind me of too many other books that I've read, simply because I haven't read a lot of Sherlock and Watson dynamics in mysteries, and I don't read a lot of like whodunit mysteries. I've read a few Agatha Christie, but they have a very different vibe than this book, personally. Similar premise, but like that whodunit mystery style story is not one I typically pick up. So I haven't read a lot of stories like this. But I'd be definitely be interested in picking some up, given how much I enjoyed this. So if you guys have any like really solid recommendations that do that kind of whodunit mystery meets thriller aspect, I would be over the moon to hear what you guys recommend. With that, I will leave you here. I have talked way too long, rambled way too long, especially given that I've now completely busted my channel and the YouTube algorithm, and we'll see if I can recover. So I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.